Welcome. This is Jean Eaton of Information Managers. It is my honor and pleasure to be with you today at Practice Management Nuggets. This is a weekly interview series with practice managers, healthcare providers, or trusted vendors who support healthcare practices. Our topics help primary care practice managers, healthcare providers, and owners to implement, maintain, or improve their business and practice administration so that healthcare providers can focus on providing quality healthcare services. I am your host, Jean Eaton, the Practice Management Mentor with Information Managers. This week, our guest is Nelson Scott, author of Thanks, Great Job, Improve Retention, Boost Morale, and Increase Engagement with High-Value, Low-Cost Recognition. So we are going to talk for the next 30 minutes about the value of staff recognition, and I want to introduce you to Nelson Scott. So since becoming a full-time consultant, speaker, trainer, and facilitator in 1995, Nelson Scott has worked with managers, supervisors, and administrators who are committed to hiring the right people and retaining, motivating, and engaging them using high-value, low-cost staff recognition. His presentations and writing challenge people to build on what they already know, to make the right hiring decisions, and to acknowledge employees for what they achieve and how they contribute to an organization's success. Okay. Nelson has conducted more than 3,000 interviews, hired hundreds of people, and made more hiring mistakes than he cares to admit. He has trained thousands of managers and supervisors from a variety of public, private, and not-for-profit sector organizations on how to use interviews to gather high-quality information on which to base their hiring decisions. He also works with clients to develop interview questions, to prepare them to conduct interviews, and to manage the selection process on their behalf. So Nelson is with us today to talk about staff recognition. And Nelson, I am delighted that you joined us today. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Jean. I'm really pleased to be here.
And we have a lot of information that you're going to share with us about staff recognition practices. And one of my questions for you, Nelson, is what would you suggest would be the number one thing that a healthcare provider or an owner can do to improve staff recognition? What would be your number one tip?
Well, that's a really good question. Number one tip, I think, is you just have to be aware of you have to be with the people that work with you. You have to be aware of what they're doing. You have to observe what they're doing. And you really have to be motivated by a desire to let them know they are valued as individuals and appreciated for how they contribute and what they achieve.
Okay, so being observant, being there, and I guess being there both mind and body at the same time, so that you can truly be observant.
That would be correct, yes.
Okay. All right, so Nelson, please tell us about your book. I've got a copy on my desk. It's right. Thanks, great job. Tell us what we can learn from the book.
Well, it has hundreds of tips on how to provide staff recognition. And I think if you look at the kind of the bottom, the subtitle of the book, where it talks about how we can improve retention, boost morale, increase engagement, well, those are some of the benefits of recognition. The second part of that subtitle is that the book is filled with high value. High value is in the minds of the recipient, the people who are being recognized, and low cost. Now, low cost is in terms of your resources, your time, your effort, and your money. And most of the tips that are in the book are very inexpensive, simple to implement.
I really like that point, and one of the things that you've made a point to say is that a staff recognition program isn't about the money.
No, it isn't. I mean, people come to work because they want to get a paycheck, of course, and that provides their, I guess, financial income. But people also have emotional needs, and they need to feel that they're valued as individuals. that we notice what they're doing and appreciate them for what they're doing. And when we use high-value, low-cost staff recognition ideas, it's a way of doing that and doing it frequently.
Okay. So you've talked about the staff recognition program, and your book is called Great Staff Recognition. What are the 5 characteristics of meaningful staff recognition?
Well, the word GREAT is an acronym that reminds us of what the 5 ingredients are. Recognition needs to be genuine. It has to be must be motivated by a genuine sense of appreciation for what the person did. We strengthen that message when we make it relevant, which means it relates to the values and the goals of the organization. That it is explicit, which means we're specific in describing what the person did. It's appropriate, which means we know people well enough to know how best to recognize each individual or each team within the organization. And finally, it's timely, which is what it suggests, that we don't wait forever to recognize people. The sooner we can do it, the better.
Okay. So we've got our acronym for great recognition. Tell us some more about the first part, about being genuine.
Well, being genuine means that it is real, that there is that emotional connection with the person. Often, or sometimes, recognition, especially formal recognition, doesn't really feel genuine. People that seem to be going through the actions. They kind of paste a smile on their face, and so that they look like they're happy, but they really don't know. There are things that tell us it's not genuine. It's more of a ritual. Often the message can be generic, that everyone hears the same words, everyone gets the same letter on the same day telling them how valued they are. Recognition also that isn't genuine often is more focused on the tokens of appreciation than the real emotional feelings that go into it. And the recognition is often impersonal. It's given to groups, not individuals. It's done through formal events, not day-to-day interaction between, say, a supervisor and the person he or she supervises. Often the recognition seems to be more about the person providing the recognition than the person receiving the recognition. So, a few things that we can do to ensure the recognition is relevant or identified on the slide in front of you. Care about the people you work with. Care about what they do. Understand why what they do is important. Create an environment of trust and respect. Without trust, without respect, recognition is going to be difficult. And be consistent. Don't play favorites. Recognize what somebody does that deserves to be recognized, no matter who it was that did it.
Okay. So we've got some characteristics about how we can be genuine with our staff recognition. What is the next step?
Well, the next part is to be relevant. And relevant means that it's tied to the values of organizations. And often those come out of strategic planning sessions. And often what comes out of strategic planning session is kind of ignored. We'll move on to the next slide, perhaps, Jean. This one reminds me of a little exercise I do when I'm doing a training session. And I have everyone stand up, close their eyes, and hold their hand out in front of them and point north. And what happens is something like this. Everyone thinks they're going in the right direction within the organization, but in fact, people are going in different directions, but assuming that they're doing what is expected of them. And as I said, this comes out of strategic planning. And a strategic planning session is sometimes like going to Las Vegas. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens in strategic planning stays in the executive offices. And I've got it way ahead of you, haven't I?
You have just a moment. Let me get caught up with you because I like your analogy about Vegas.
Okay, so if we go to the next slide, there's a few things we can do to ensure the recognition we're providing is relevant. One of the things we do is we talk to people about setting job targets, and those job targets are consistent with the mission and values and goals. we can highlight the actions and how those help us reach those goals, or how what we're doing, what behaviors kind of reflect the values of the organization. And it's important that often, that the mission statement, the values, aren't just something that's put up on the wall and ignored by everyone. We review those from time to time and list the behaviors that would move us closer to those outcomes.
Okay, so by doing that, making that the acknowledgement genuine and something that we've observed, it helps to make that recognition relevant.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. All right, so our next step then is making that explicit. So what do you have in mind when you want to recognize, say, a recognition and make it explicit?
Okay, if we, on the next slide, can you imagine getting a card that says this? Well, chances are you won't, because as far as I know from visiting a lot of card shops, I have never found this card. But if we go to the next slide, you'll find a card that basically says the same thing. Thank you for everything you do. Well, thanking people for everything is like saying, well, there's nothing in particular stands out in what you've done. So I think it's really important that we focus on what people did and we describe it in specific terms, because when we do that, it makes it seem more genuine, because we are telling the person we are actually observing what you're doing. We're paying attention to what you're doing, and we value what you're doing. So if we move on, there's some on the next slide. I think we have some suggestions on what we can do to do that. So basically, as I just said, be specific. Describe what the person did and that you appreciate that. There's a little formula I can use. It's called situation, action, results. What was the situation? What action did the person take? And what was the result of that action? If we do that, we're going to have a fairly specific description of what happened.
Situation, action, and result. I love it.
Okay, well, thank you. And the other one that I've suggested, people say to me, well, recognition is a great idea, but what about the people who are somewhat underachievers? I mean, recognition is easy with high performers, or top performers. What about the people who are underachieving? Well, if we're being when we're specific and we're explicit in providing our recognition, we can focus on maybe just a small thing that person does well. And maybe if we start providing with that recognition, the result of that recognition maybe will start motivating him to do more of what we appreciate. And who knows, we may actually lift the quality of the performance of the person who's currently an underachiever.
That's an interesting point. Sometimes just being able to provide some recognition and acknowledgement and recognition will actually inspire somebody to continue to do that great behavior and feel like they've been recognized so that they want to do better for next time.
That's true, Jean, and it's not just limited to what I would describe as underachievers. I think anyone within the organization is going to be more inspired, more motivated, if they know that somebody's watching what they're doing, is paying attention, and that appreciates them, that values their contributions. I think that just is going to create a more positive work environment for everyone that's involved.
Absolutely, I'm with you. Okay, what's our next step?
Well, let's move on to appropriate, which is the A in great. And appropriate means we find the right way to recognize people. Sometimes I think that people are looking for that one solution, that one tool, a multi-tool, a Swiss Army knife, or the equivalent of a Swiss Army knife for staff recognition, and that doesn't exist. It's like when someone says, one size fits all. Really what it comes down to is that one size fits one person, and that's all. So you've got a staff made up of a whole bunch of different individuals, and we need to understand those people. What's important to them? What makes it tick? And some of the things we can find out about them. What are their interests and hobbies? Where do they see their career going? The old question that is asked in interviews, and should never be asked in interviews, by the way, is where do you see yourself in 5 years? however, hire somebody, then we can start asking that question. What do they like to read? Fiction, non-fiction? Do they like, what magazines do they like? What charities do they support? What's their favorite treats? A salty treat or a sweet treat or something like that. Who are their favorite performers? Who do they like to watch perform? It could be in sports. It could be in someone on the stage, a musician or something like that. And there's another question that's really important, and that is, where do they want to be recognized? Some people love being recognized in public. I was meeting with a staff in an organization yesterday, and there was one woman I really remember who said, I just really need to be recognized in public. The person next to him sitting next to her said, not me. I want it to be in private. And we need to know that. We need to know what their preferences are. Sometimes I think we tend to want to focus on recognition that occurs in public because, the cynical part of me says the person providing the recognition wants to prove that he actually is recognizing people. But we have to be aware of how people prefer to be recognized. So, you saw a whole bunch of, you saw a slide there of a picture of all kinds of ways that you can take that information that we know about people and apply it to do that. So, respecting their preference for public and private, I've talked about that. Sometimes you want we give people birthday cards, but sometimes you might want to take a person aside on their birthday or their employment anniversary and just say, let's just reflect on what's happened over the past year and pick 2 or 3 things that really stand out and say, and thank them again for having done that. If you're going to provide food as part of your recognition in some organizations, especially when they're saying thank you to a team, use food. Make sure the food that you're offering matches the individual's preference in terms of the kinds of food they like to eat.
Okay, so knowing a bit more about the individuals that you are going to recognize helps to make that recognition more meaningful and personal.
That's correct. Yeah, and I think, again, getting back to the concept of being genuine, the sooner, the more personalized, the more appropriate the recognition we provide, the more the person believes that we believe that he or she is a valuable member of our staff.
Okay. So that brings us to timely. I suppose that means that we shouldn't wait too long to recognize people.
That's correct. Sometimes often when I do a public work or a workshop and I'm in front of an audience, I begin the presentation by opening a can of Coke, pouring it into a glass, setting it on the table in front of the audience, and letting it sit there until I get to this point in the presentation. And then I walk around and I try to give the Coke away. I haven't touched it. I haven't taken a sip out of it. And nobody wants it. And the reason they don't want it is because they know it's flat. And that happens with recognition. The longer it sits there unexpressed, the more the fizz is gone. And we want to recognize people before the fizz is gone. So when we're talking about being timely, we're talking in terms of hours or days, not weeks or months, or in some cases years before we recognize people for doing something. The quicker we do it, the better. Simple tool that you can use to provide timely recognition is take a few minutes at the end of each day and maybe write some thank you notes to people. A handwritten thank you note is such a powerful message. Another thing you can do is take a Post-it note and just stick it on somebody's computer. I've actually got some hanging on my computer that people who have been in my workshops have written down and kind of stuck to the evaluation form, or in some cases have actually come up and stuck on my computer. And I look at them every day and I'm saying, when I read someone says, awesome job, really enjoyed your presentation, even though that presentation in that case I think was over a year ago, it still makes me feel good about that kind of feedback. We can do the same. And, again, very little time, almost no cost associated with that. Sometimes, we can send people an email or a text message and say thanks. And sometimes it's really important that we just take time to listen to people. It shows that we value them. So a few suggestions there is, keep track of when and how you've recognized people so that we don't allow the recognition to become overdue. It can be a simple system as just having a card with everybody's name on every time on your desk, and you just make a jot down a note that you've recognized people on April 28th. And if you look through the cards and discover at the end of August you haven't spoken to that person, you need to go back and do something. Just have some things with you in terms of, have your thank you notes, your treats, small gifts, or things like that you can do that. And schedule time either at the end of your day or at the beginning of your day or once a week to recognize people. The advantage of doing it at the end of the day, and you sit down, you've got your 15-minute recognition time. You're going to write some notes that you put in people's, so they'll be waiting for people the next morning. But what a wonderful way to end your day, to make that transition from your work life to your private life by spending the last 15 minutes of your work day focusing on positive things that went well within the organization that day.
A couple of things I wanted to pick up on here, Nelson. I really enjoyed that little acronym about describing the recognition into the situation and the action and the result. So you're not looking at that blank piece of paper or the thank you note or the sticky note about what you need to write. You know that you've got a formula. What did you observe? What was the action? What was the result? And thank you.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it is as simple as saying thank you. Even like you'll notice in the top right-hand corner, the little Post-it note there. If you just happen to be walking by someone and you're doing a good job, and they may be working with a client, but you just kind of observed that they were maybe calming that client down or something like that, just even write down thanks, you did a great job, like the way you handled that, or something like that, and give it to them. It is genuine, it is timely, it may be appropriate, and maybe it isn't explicit, but both the staff member and you both understand what that person did. So maybe you don't need to be explicit in describing that. And by the way, that's one thing about the ingredients is as long as your recognition is genuine, it must be genuine. Every time you add one of those others, the message becomes stronger. But you don't have to have all 5 ingredients there. Make it genuine and timely. That alone gets the message across that you appreciate the person. Okay.
Now, I also like your idea of having a list of all the employees or volunteers or the folks that you work with, and you just use that list as a reminder to say, have you make a point of recognizing the next person on the list, Nelson, today. So go out of your way to take a look at what Nelson is doing and find something to acknowledge. If that hasn't come up spontaneously, make sure that you've identified something to acknowledge for everybody on a regular basis.
Yeah, and part of the reason you're doing that is it is a reminder, but it also starts to become a habit, and what happens is recognition becomes a habit. It is more spontaneous, and at some point you maybe can just set the list aside, and because you know that you're going to be you recognize people regularly. Right.
Okay. So when would you start recognizing a new employee in an organization, Nelson?
Before they arrive.
How do you do something before?
Well, you've hired the person. Maybe make sure that they get message. That if there's a period of time between the time you hire them and their first day on the job, pick up the phone, give them a call, just let them know you're looking forward to their arrival. Depending where you in the organization, maybe the person, your boss, maybe phones and says, Jean just tells me that she's hired you. She's really excited about you coming. I just wanted to add my words of welcome to that. Let the other staff members know that somebody is coming. Maybe they can make some contact, either on day one or even before. If you can sit down with the person and say, let's talk about your interview. And tell the person why you hired them, because the reasons, there's a lot of good news there. There are a lot of positive reasons that you hired that person. Talk about what you saw on their resume or what they said in the interview. Explain why you hired them. Let them know what strengths you saw in them that you want them to use on the job. One person, an assistant manager of a hotel, was telling me that he had been hired for a job and he thought it was based on a certain set of strengths, but in fact the person that hired him wanted him to do something different. On day one, make sure the person, don't put the person off in a small room reading the company policy manual. Make sure that make sure they can make a contribution on the first day. If a person shows up and nobody is ready for them, they don't have a place for them to work, business cards aren't ready, people will make a decision on their first day. They're either going to commit to continuing to work for you, or they're going to commit to their next job search. If they go home and don't feel they were valued, then that's sad. Then they're going to start looking for another job. In my book, I describe how that happened to our son. First day on the job that he really wanted, he'd applied 3 times with that company. Shows up, it was such a bad experience, he immediately began looking for another job. And he went to work for a company, and 12, 13 years later, he's still working for the new company.
That's really interesting. So don't wait to recognize employees and your volunteers. I mean, they're so important to your organization. Start off right away, and that way you're going to be able to keep those employees longer, and you're going to have a more positive experience, and good behaviors rub off on other people so they can observe what you're doing, demonstrating good practices so that they can do that too, and it becomes improves that climate of culture.
Yeah, on that first day, find some reason to sit down or to praise the person, to recognize him for something he or she did. Make sure that he goes home or she goes home at the end of the day feeling, if the family says, how was your first day? The person says, that was a good day, and I contributed in this fashion. Let them know and provide opportunities for them to ask questions. Have somebody else on staff that is a mentor, not mentor in terms of developing skills, but someone who tells them the secret life of the organization, the things that would never be part of the formal orientation, but often is just as important for people to know.
I think one of the things that you've mentioned in your book was everybody's going to ask the person that has started a new job that day, how was their first day at work? So make sure that you've given them something to celebrate and to share with the rest of their family and friends about that first day of work.
Yeah. You well stated. I wish I had written in those words when I wrote the book.
Well, I think it's an excellent point. It really certainly works very resonates with me. So the book is really valuable, Nelson, and people can get the book from you directly, or if they're in Edmonton, they can go to Audrey's Books, and it's now on Amazon. It is on Amazon, but congratulations.
Well, it's not hard to get there, but it just costs a lot to ship it to them. If people want to... The interesting thing is Amazon. It's only available in the States on Amazon, and they're charging in U.S. dollars. So, in fact, it's much cheaper to buy it in Canadian dollars. It's the same... $20 Canadian is different than $20 U.S. So,
yes, it is.
But Amazon can also be very convenient for people. I know that, which is why the book is there.
Right. So they can purchase the books directly from you. They can contact you by email to find out how to get the book in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got a really cool promotion coming up for the month of May. Can you tell us about their Staff Recognition Month?
Yeah, we did this for the first time last year, and we were kind of encouraged by some, including yourself, Jean, to do it again this year. And what happens is every morning throughout the month of May, 31 times we will send out a tip on staff recognition, which meets the criteria of being simple, inexpensive, easy to implement, and something that we know that at least some people will value. So if people want to be added to the distribution list, it's pretty low tech in terms, I don't have a sign-up point or a link to it. Just send me an email, and I'll do that. And as a bonus for signing up this year, you will almost immediately, get a link to all of last year's staff recognition tips. So, which is about, to be honest with you, I missed 2 days last year, but made up for that. We added a few extra things into the collection that people will get as their bonus.
I think it's a great opportunity to be able to use May as a staff recognition tip a day. All of those tips are going to help inspire some ideas on how you can easily, easily and a low-cost way to be able to share staff recognition tips, implemented in your work environment and the other volunteer and community parts of your life, and to be able to demonstrate those good practices. And it's not about the money, it's about being great.
Well, that's correct.
Okay.
Okay.
So what can we do if we want to learn more ways in which to recognize our staff?
Well, I mean, certainly buy the book would be one thing. Sign up for the tip a day during Staff Recognition Month. People can go to my website. They can sign up for my newsletter, which comes out about once every 2 weeks. And that part of our commitment there is there will always be at least 3 or 4 staff recognition ideas. Sometimes there are articles that contain even a lot more ideas than that. There's also information on conducting interviews, which is the other part of my life. You can follow me on Twitter because occasionally I'll put something up there in terms of staff recognition. Having said that, you might want to go to a bookstore, grab something by Bob Nelson. His most recent book is Recognizing and Engaging Employees for Dummies. But he's also, another great book he has is 1001 Ways to, pardon me, I'm straining to look at the title here. Let me reach over and grab the title. 1001 Rewards and Recognition Field Book. Incredible. I talked to him after he wrote it. He says almost anything he ever learned about recognition is in that book. You might want to get a hold of a book by Adrian Gostick and Chester Elton. They have a whole series of books that are all orange. It's all on the carrot principle and so on. Cindy Ventris, I think her name is, has written one called Make Our Day or Make My Day. Can't see a copy of that right now, but all of these are really good books in terms of recognition.
Okay.
Or you can just hire me to come and do a workshop for you.
Absolutely. Having Nelson as a speaker for your event or for a retreat, and to be able to inspire everybody else in your organization to become great at staff recognition. The newsletter is always useful, and the recognition tip a month, I've got it wrong now, a tip a day for
fault.
Recognition Month in May.
Yeah.
And in September, you have another opportunity to be able to recognize your all-stars in your organization. Yeah,
well, this is kind of a lead up to National Boss Day, which is in, I think, October 16th each year. And what we've started doing a few years ago is inviting people to tell us about the people who do an outstanding job of recognizing staff. And they become our Staff Recognition All-Stars. And we have drawn them from education, banking, emergency medical services in the past. And I'm probably, there was somebody from the utility company one year, education and so on. So again, on our website, there's an opportunity to submit a nomination form there as well.
Okay. So we have lots of opportunities to keep in touch with you. We're going to wrap up in just a couple of minutes. So if you've got a question for Nelson, please enter it into the chat box or the Q&A box on the screen in front of you. And Nelson, is there anything else that you want to say about staff recognition?
Well, how can I wrap it up? Just to add to what you've said, if anybody ever wants to contact me and just ask questions about it, I can always direct them towards resources as well. A while back, there was a little cartoon there. There was a couple sitting in their living room, and he was reading the newspaper, and she was knitting, and she puts down her knitting, and she looks at her husband and says, "You never tell me you love me." He put down his newspaper and looked at her and said, "I told you I loved you when we got married 30 years ago. If anything changes, I'll be sure to let you know. Well, that's not going to work. I don't think that is the way of strengthening a marriage. And it's also not the way of strengthening the relationship we have with our employees. If we tell people we love them the day we hire them and then never say anything else, they're going to start doubting what we said, and they're going to start drifting away. So we need to provide recognition on a regular basis. It becomes a habit. Staff starts to become dependent on it, I guess, and they look for recognition, and it really makes a difference within the organization.
That's a great story, Nelson. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Thank you for inviting me to be on your show.
I'm always happy to have you on the show, Nelson. Today we talked about great staff recognition, making it genuine, making it relevant, making it explicit, making it appropriate, and making it timely. A great way to be able to remember how to provide a staff recognition note that is low cost and has a lot of meaning and a lot of value that we can share in our work experience and in our life and community experiences. Thank you very much, Nelson Scott.
You're most welcome, Jean.
So that winds up our Practice Management Nugget webinar interview today with Nelson Scott. I want to remind you that if you enjoyed our interview today with Nelson, to take a look on our website about our upcoming guests for Practice Management Nuggets. Next week we have Jim Ewing in about doing a checkup for our business plan for our businesses. And Zaheen Nanji will be in the week after that about working on your personal resilience. We work in a healthcare practice, and sometimes we as individuals working in that healthcare practice need to know how to better cope with all of the negative stuff that sometimes our patients bring in and share with us. So a couple of guests that are coming up soon. We've got a whole roster of guests throughout the month of May and June, and I look forward to having you join us for Practice Management Nuggets. This is Jean Eaton, your Practice Management Nugget host, and I'm delighted that you have been able to share this time with us. I look forward to seeing you again at one of our upcoming events. And remember to keep Nelson's words in mind to help you improve and become great at staff recognition. Stay tuned.